All right, all right, all right. Brandon, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Awesome, buddy. Hey, everybody on here, thank you so much for joining us. We are on session 10 of our CISSP study group where we're going to be digging into domains 1.8 and 1.9. So we're crossing over into domain 1.9, where we're going to be touching on vendors, security governance, and risk management. Once again, thank you guys for joining us 7 p.m. Eastern time for this CISSP training. Brandon, my awesome co-host, is joining me once again today. Brandon, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks, Joel. Episode 10.
Can you believe it?
That's awesome.
We beat the odds, man.
We beat the odds. If you can make it to 10 now, you know you're successful.
That's it. Now, if you guys are watching, if you'll give us little claps, that would be much appreciated. It also helps tell us who's in here so we can recognize you guys. So please, thumbs up, clap, something like that. Give us a reaction so we know who's in the channel. And as you guys give us that, we'll give you little shout outs for being here. And then we'll bring you guys into the conversation for this training. Fair enough?
Awesome. Now, also, if you guys know anyone, share this out to them. If you know anyone that's studying for the CISSP or they're experts, we'd love to have them on the show and just have a conversation about, their thoughts and their areas of expertise when it comes to CISSP. So make sure, you share it out as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let me go ahead and get that calendar invite real quick. Let's see if I can publish the event. A link to the event copy. So, guys, I'm going to go ahead and put the, this is a Google Calendar invite. You guys can go ahead and add that to your Google Calendar. If you're studying for the CISSP right now, we're looking to take it as a group either before the new year or right after the new year. So this is what that study group is for. So go ahead and click that calendar link. It's in the chat. Add that to your calendar. It's just going to alert you 10 minutes before. You can set it for 7 p.m. on Tuesdays. That's when we do this training. Awesome. Would you want to, let's jump in. Let's see, once again, if you guys are just jumping in, throwing some claps and thumbs ups. Looks like we have Emmanuel. He is a senior consultant at Coalfire. Welcome. Looks like you don't have your CISSP yet. So Emmanuel, I'm curious, what's your track for CISSP? Are you looking to jump in and do this with us? Leave an answer in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Sean Delane is back. Sean, buddy, welcome back this week. We also have Salome Fanta. Salome, thank you so much. I think you even put a post on LinkedIn about this. Am I right, Brandon?
I think so. I thought I saw her share it out and like the one I just posted as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and those claps, those are for you, Salome. Thank you. And then we have Patrice Walters, and I work with Patrice. Fantastic. We do have to sync up here this week, Patrice, and touch base on your clients. So awesome. Brandon, will you give us our weekly minute recap from last week?
So let's go back through that. I mean, we've covered a lot of information so far. I know last week, I'm just pulling this up right now, we covered candidate screening and hiring, employment agreements and policies, onboarding and termination policies. And then this week, today, what we're covering is vendors, consultants, and contract agreements and controls, compliance policies and requirements, and then privacy policy requirements. So a lot of, administrative controls. Right, looking at the policies and all that, and sometimes it can be dry. So guys, keep with us. If you have any questions or even any feedback as we're going, let us know.
Yeah, that's it. Now I want to throw up a couple of those graphics real quick. So the first one is we touched on a few things, and I had the graphics, so I figured, hey, what the heck? Let's throw them up real fast just for a quick recap. So separation of duties. You have different types of management, whether it be database, firewall, user account management, but you're going to have different admins for that. Now, after a period of time, depending on your type of business, you'll want to then begin implementing that job rotation. And that job rotation is going to not only make sure that you don't have any collusion going on, anybody abusing the power and control and permissions they have, but it's also going to give you more well-rounded employees. So there are job benefits to that. And then last but not least, when you're offboarding a client, it's no longer just a pink slip, right? So we spent a lot of time on onboarding, offboarding last week, and we talked about how difficult it is to actually lay off an employee now, right? There's a lot of checks, steps, requirements, especially with the COVID environment going on. Am I missing anything, Brandon? Were there any things that stuck out to you at the end of last session?
Well, again, it's just, the way there you go through the process of training, right? you go through your due diligence and do care of it, really evaluating your employees, right? And then making sure that you have, we had separation of duties, separation of responsibilities, of course, both the same. We were looking at vacations, just all these things to take care of, understanding where your employees stand and what they need to do. And then, like you said, when it comes to laying off, you had having a process of when to disable their accounts, right? When you're going through that, to make sure at any point in time, if you're, having that discussion and you're laying someone off, that all their access, is being disabled, from physical access to also the electronic through the computers and their systems and any access they have through the whole entire network.
Yeah, that's it. Awesome. Great point, Brandon. Now, before we start, we had a few more people throw some thumbs up in here, so I want to recognize them real quick. Christine, welcome back. I'm excited to have you again. Thank you for joining us again. And then we have a newcomer, I think, Jack Longmire. Says IT professional focusing on cybersecurity. Looks like he's got a Sec Plus, and he's working on a CEH in his junior pen testing cert as well. So, Jack, nice. It's a pleasure. Sounds like you got a couple years under your belt. So getting in this training and getting started on it's going to be good. I wish I had it when I was, or started thinking about it when I was in your shoes, back when I was starting to get the CEH, et cetera. So,
the funny thing, when I was actually starting the CISSP, I can't remember, it was Sean Harris. Mm-hmm. I totally remember her. I don't know if anyone's remembered her, and, too bad she got sick and passed away, but she was one of the icons when it came to the CISSP when you started training. I remember getting one of her all-in-one books. This was back in 2005, 2006, and that thing was huge.
Wait, are you telling me you started studying for this in 2005 and you still don't have it? Okay.
Okay. So once upon a time, when things weren't, I worked for the Ontario government, so we were all lazy at that point, right? So I got the book, and then I became a government employee. So I didn't really want to do much, any work. But all jokes aside, I got busy, right? And like we were talking about before, I just got busy and I wasn't able to do it. But, this is the great thing about being part of a study group like this, is that being accountable. So I love to hear from the group. And then Joel and I have put this out there that as of December 2020, we're going to write, the first round, first try, first shot at this exam. So I love to hear that you guys that are trying it are going to go for it. When's your date? What's your drop dead date that you're going to say, I'm going to write it?
Yeah, I'd love to hear that from the group. And also, Jack says that CISSP is a ways off, but he's looking forward to the knowledge. And so, Jack, CEH is really getting into kind of tool sets. You have some Security Plus-like questions on there. The CISSP, what we're realizing is it's very text-heavy, very much management level, but it's good knowledge that's all intertwined with the stuff you're learning now. So keep it up. Don't just learn it and forget it, right? Because you're going to need that information once you come back to the CISSP.
Well, the other thing is great is that depending on your discussions, day in and day out, this is going to help you through the discussions from upper management, working with IT teams, cybersecurity teams, board of directors, financial. It's all going to be great to be able to have those discussions and have this foundation to be able to do that, because, and I don't know about you, Joel, but I'm finding this more and more, having the business conversation is so important in cybersecurity, not just technology, but understanding the business needs.
Yeah. Well, and take what you learn here and implement it in your meetings, right? That repetition is going to help solidify it as well. Cool. Brandon, we got to jump in, buddy. We got a lot to cover this week. You ready?
Don't we always?
We do. It's all good. All right. So jumping in, this is about vendor, consultant, contractor agreement, and controls. We're going to touch on this really briefly. We touched on NDAs and non-competes with employees last week. This is more about the vendors, and I'm sure anybody in cybersecurity knows about service level agreements. That's the specific policy we're touching on. Yeah. Over to you, Brandon.
Yeah, so using SLAs is increasing popularity. The way to ensure the organization provides services to internal or external customer, maintaining an appropriate level of service agreed on both the service provided and the vendor. Yeah. So it's important to make sure you review it. I've heard this a lot of times with MSPs. You review it once, you get kind of signed up, and you're doing that, but all of a sudden something happens, like the pandemic.
Yeah.
Now, have you reviewed it? Have you reviewed it and gone back through it and see if the SLAs have changed? Because I know for myself, talking to certain companies, the level of support might have changed because they had to lay off staff.
That's true.
Right?
I'll come back to that later. But we did a SLA review and we needed a change done. Like we read it and we're like, That's not acceptable with other policies we have in place. We went back to them, asked them if they would change it. They refused. They're no longer one of our third parties. So, you got to be able to review it, because sometimes some of those service level agreements may cross into other policies that you already have in place. So you got to put these in place for any data circuits, applications, info processing systems, databases even, right? And other critical components. You got to have a service level agreement. Now, it's easy just to click it. I agree. At least get it over to your legal team if you have it, right? Get them to review it with them, skim through the parts that may be relevant to you. I know it's a lot of paperwork, but it's important to have.
Right now, here's something that companies address in the SLA. You look at system uptime as a percentage of overall, operating time, maximum consecutive downtime in seconds, minutes, or so on. So depending on how you want to rank it, peak load, average load, who's responsible for diagnosing? Is it yourself? Do you have your own internal teams, or is it the actual partner that you have that you're working with? Failover time, if redundancy is in place. So if you have a firewall and you have failover, what does that failover mean? And what happens when it does fail? What's the process, right?
Yeah, and service level agreements also can include like financial or contractual like remedies if those things aren't maintained, right? So if they can't live up to their SLA, take this for example, like let's say you have something down for 15 minutes and the service provider may agree to waive charges on there for your business for a certain period of time. Now, this could, although they're going to compensate you for it financially or not make you pay for it for that level of a certain period of time, it could increase your potential risk by expanding your attack surface, right? So you have to weigh these in place. Like, what are the pros and cons? Let's say they fail on their SLA. Yes, we're compensated, but does that make up for the risk that we then took on for that? These are things you're going to have to take into account.
Yeah, as you're writing out your policy, and that's actually a good point, is that the penalties. What are the penalties, and what enforces those penalties, and what are the triggers that make those penalties valid? Like, for example, if your main e-commerce site is down and you're not making revenue, now, what's the SLA around that? Because now revenue is being affected, the profits are being affected. Now, if it's a data server, there might be a different SLA. If there's a, e-commerce, it might be more crucial. So review it and make sure that, if you guys are not, familiar with SLAs, review and kind of see all these, different stages and different processes that are in there, and kind of ask and go through it, because it's so essential. I know when I worked for the Ontario government, we had instant response, and I was one of the instant response, response people. When we went through the SLA, I mean, there were certain things that, like, we supported hospitals, and it was like 1 hour response time. Like, they could not be down, right? And then, everyone was like on, high alert. EDS innovations for the network, the hospitals on call, and it was like 24/7. So at 2:00 in the morning, something went down. That SLA went in. The incident manager was on call. Like, everyone was on a conference call within like half an hour.
All right, so over to you guys. SLAs, third parties, right? There's a lot about third party security right now. What are you guys seeing? Are you guys seeing these SLAs impacted by COVID? Are these things you have to review? Is it not something that you're worrying about in your current job role at all? Want to hear from you guys. Throw it in the chat. We'll circle back around. Any questions you guys have around it as well. And this comes back to, and we're going to touch on this later in this session, but you got to be able to ask yourself, what is the worst that could happen? You have to be able to ask yourself that. So we'll come back to that specific question later in the session. We're going to move on to security governance, though. Now,
let's do that.
Yeah, so this is the collection of practices related to supporting, defining, and directing the security efforts of an organization. So you were talking about holistic security governance. Yeah.
I mean, it's security governance is closely related to and often intertwined with the corporate and IT governance. So it's so close to that.
Yeah, so it is. We're talking security, corporate, IT. All of these are going to be working. Now, the goals of these agendas are going to be interrelated or even the same, right? Now, there's three specific types of governance in security governance. First is third-party governance. Now, this is the system of oversight that's maybe mandated by law, regulation, industry standards, those SLAs we were talking about, or potentially licensing agreements.
Right. It can be contractual to obligations to something that your partner has as enforced. Now, we'll see this a lot in the industry, and I don't know if you guys are seeing this as well, where a larger client of yours now is enforcing that you have this. Right. And we've seen that a lot in cybersecurity where a client will go, they're a big, conglomerate company and say, we need you to meet these security requirements, these SLAs, these, all that. And now they enforce it. So it's contractual and you don't want to lose that client, right?
You know what's going to be addressing this really heavily in the near future?
What's that?
CMMC.
Yep.
Right. So this is the DoD requiring all of their suppliers, government contractors to be CMMC certified. Third-party risk is going to be a big component of that. So it's going to be interesting to see.
It is. It's going to be. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, now you can outsource this as well, right? So a lot of people outsource third-party governments, right? So you can have things like, so when you're talking about methods of governance, it could vary, right? It could be an outside investigator, it could be an auditor. These auditors could be designated by a governing body, like Brandon mentioned. But you can also outsource those operations. So you could have a security guard company. For maintenance, you can outsource that. Technical support, account services, right? So you can have those things outsourced as well.
On these parties may need to stay in compliance with the primary organization's security stance.
Right.
Otherwise, they present additional risk and vulnerabilities to the primary organization. Now, just to add on to what you're saying, some companies now, because they might not have a compliance, officer in the actual organization, they look for MGRC programs. I know that's where Usada, what we have, where it's a managed government risk compliance program, where we help, companies support them from getting compliant. They go out, get their certification, their compliance, they come back and we manage it throughout the year, making sure they stay up to date. So depending on where you are, you might have your internal team or you might need to outsource it like that.
So what are you guys doing? Just curious that's your company business model. What are you guys doing for third-party risk right now?
Well, we're looking at doing it like a security assessment first, a gap analysis to see where they are.
Okay.
Right. And from that baseline, then evaluating what's the roadmap of where your current risks are. And then if it's compliance or if it's technology, then we draw a roadmap of what they need to implement. And then depending on their budget and their appetite for risk, we start developing out that plan.
Nice. I put you on the spot. I'm going to give stamp of approval. You passed.
Did I? I didn't see it written down anywhere.
That was good.
Check.
Check.
So now I think Sean said something here. I found out that COVID has greatly impacted the ability to reach a person at many of the companies I deal with. So, and now I want to ask Sean this, and this is what I wanted to put in too. Sean, are you finding that, is it because of short of staff, like they've reduced their resources, or are they just so busy right now? Now, Joel, are you finding that as well? Like the partners and people that you work with?
Yeah. So we had one partner that we were working with, and it was actually a new spin up. And they said, look, guys, I have my network and IT staff working 12 to 14-hour days right now. I just can't dedicate any more time. Like they're stressed. So they're once again, they're now outsourcing some security functions to us. Right. So it's interesting to see that people are just stressed with COVID all the way across the board.
Yeah. And for me, I'm seeing the same thing. And it comes either to one of two ways. Either one, they're extremely busy, and just overworked 20-hour days. Or the other side is that they had to they weren't getting enough work. They lost some clients because they weren't able to, pay their bills, and the bigger organizations stopped and wanted to hold off to find out. So now the smaller organizations now had to reduce their staff, and now they don't have the staff for support, the resources. So I'm seeing it on both sides. This pandemic is affecting people right across. Well,
and as business ramps back up, they're just not able to support. They can't. Right. Yeah, so it's really interesting. Sure. And thanks for jumping on that, on Sean's comment. My screen had frozen, so I didn't even see the chat coming in.
No, not a problem. And then we got another one from Simone. I am not involved with SLA at the current job, but I assume the SLA is an impact by COVID. I don't think providers will be able to deliver service with the same expectation due to everyone using technology heavily, and home network is involved.
That's a great
Interesting.
point. Well, have you called support in the last 6 months and they go, due to COVID, we're taking, it's delayed wait times, right? Everybody across the board.
And they're international. A lot of the support, like if you call the telecommunication, anything like that, they have international support. So you got to think of how that's routing to them and now their systems and help desk. So it's a lot.
Yeah, you're right. Now, back to audits, on-site assessments, you mentioned that you guys take that baseline. Now, what we're seeing for CISSP specifically, you're going to have to follow these protocols, such as control objectives for information or related technology. That's COBIT, COBIT. And these frameworks and protocols have specific checklists, right? So whether you're looking at NIST, COBIT, ITIL, what have you, they're going to have checklists. So depending on the type of audit, there's a certain thing or set of things that the auditor is going to go down and ensure that you have.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then in many situations, especially related to the government or military agencies or contractors failing to provide significant documentation during an audit to meet requirements of third-party governments can result in loss of or avoiding of an authorization to operate. So that's ATO. So it's actually an acronym you guys need to know.
Yeah. So you have to get provided ATO, right? So you have to request ATO. Sometimes they come in, they do that full scope audit, and they'll do periodic mini checks. Now, Sean mentioned something. Sean said, hey, it's a combination of many companies trying to do more with less, right? Not having enough resources and some people working remotely and not fully supporting their customers. I mean, you're spot on, Sean. Are you doing the same, right? Our company's trying to do more with less. We went through a round of layoffs. It's been tough, right? Because businesses start to ramp back up and there's a few people that are like single points of failure at this point, and they are overworked. I'm sure they're well paid, maybe not underpaid, but they're definitely putting in their hours. So great.
Yes,
great
we're
comment.
fortunate. We actually stayed status quo.
Nice.
And we're maintaining, and we're still growing as a business. So I think it depends on the industry you're in as well, because some industries are growing right now.
Yeah, they are. I mean, you look at Zoom, right? Stock has gone up
Amazon?
500%. Amazon's killing it, right? So it just depends on the type of business, but retail is coming back. So now back to your ATO, because this is important, especially if you do business with the government, right? So the authorization to operate, you have to be able to provide the documentation. You have to provide the documentation. And it's not going to be like an ad hoc, like in the spur of a moment to get ATO. You have to be prepared. You have to go through audits before, internal audits, external audits. Be prepared with that documentation so that you can maintain that ATO.
For sure. But however, once an ATO is lost or revoked, a complete documentation review, an on-site review showing full compliance is usually necessary to reestablish the ATO. So the authorization of operate.
Well, and they'll spring those on you, like when they're going for recompetes and stuff. They'll pop you with reviews, and if you fail it, you could lose a recompete. So you got to be careful, got to be prepared. Now, a portion of the documentation review, it's logical and practical investigation of business processes and then your policies as well. So we review policies, we dig into them to make sure they're not subpar, right? So this review ensures that the stated and implemented business tax systems, your methodologies, that they're practical, they're efficient, that you're performing a sufficient CYA, right? And that they're cost effective, right? And the goal should be reducing the vulnerabilities in your environment through either avoidance, reduction, or transfers. And then they look into how you're mitigating that risk and if those security controls are effective.
For sure. And then risk management, risk assessment, addressing risk are all methods of technical involvement in performing process and policy reviews. So again, having those done, your risk management, risk assessment, having those reviewed before.
Yeah. Well, and having those on a regular cycle, right? Because we go in, how often do you do this? How many times in the last 12 months have you performed a risk assessment? How many pen tests have you done? Well, on your product, are you pen testing it, right? And that's a SLA. Many people who are in products, which one was I doing? I think it was for a SIM vendor. We said, hey, we want to see your most recent security assessment report.
Right.
And they provided it. So good stuff. It is
awesome.
all intertwined. So next we're jumping into understanding and applying management concepts. This is really fun, guys. There's a lot of terminology, so a lot of stuff that we've dug into already. So we're going to keep it tight and to the point. But understanding these risk management concepts are not only important for the CISSP exam, but it's also going to be essential for the establishment of a sufficient security stance, right? So security governance, legal proof of due care, and then your due diligence.
Right. And then you got managing risk as an element of sustaining a secure environment. So it's so important, right? I mean, a lot of companies that are not looking at this right now need to review this, right? So you look at risk management, a detailed process, identifying factors that could damage or disclose data, evaluating these factors in light of data value and countermeasures costs, and implementing cost effectiveness solutions for mitigating and reducing risk.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, Joel.
Yeah.
When you're advising your clients and you're advising them about this, what are their thoughts about the countermeasure costs and implementing cost-effective solutions right now in the pandemic?
That's a loaded question. Well,
let's ask everyone else. Like, what do you guys think? Are you seeing that's now hyper vigilant because of the pandemic?
Like people are spending more money because of the pandemic?
No, they're hyper vigilant on costs right now. So they don't want to. So they're kind of like cost measures, cutting cost measures as well as implementing cost effectively. They're kind of like, I don't know, is how much is it going to cost? Like before it was like, no, we need to get this done. Now it's, we need it, but, is there any way we can have some savings? Can we, do a payment plan? Like they're thinking of different ways to do it, still implementing all the security practices that they want, but now looking at how they can do it in a cost-effective way even more.
Yeah, and I got a couple examples, but I would like to hear in the chat, what are your companies doing? Have they just completely cut back on budget, or are you in an organization that wasn't as impacted? Well, everybody was impacted by COVID, but the budget and the spend wasn't as impacted. So I had a couple examples. I mean, we had one organization unfortunately suffered a breach.
Right.
The money kept flowing, right? More money than had ever went into security flowed and was spent during COVID than ever before. But another company who was going through internal reviews and was doing, assessments on different products, all that money dried up, right? They were in I don't want to say the industry, but basically they were in an industry where the money dried up when COVID hit. And all the funds for that additional security product and that review disappeared overnight. It was unbelievable. So, yeah. Oh, we did have a question. Christine asked, which artifacts constitute an ATO package? Whew, that's a loaded question. It depends on what you're going for ATO, right? So if you're thinking about ATO for FedRAMP, there's an entire process you have to go through. I'd love to dig deeper into that with you maybe later. Is there something you're looking in regards to ATO packages? I'd love to hear more or a follow-on question to that. But it depends is the answer to that, Christine. But I digress. Where are we, Brandon? We're
right here. The primary goals of risk.
Yeah, so primary goals of risk management is to reduce risk, right? To an acceptable level. I mean, that's what risk management is all about. It's getting a grasp on what you have, how you can secure it, and if you can't, what's the acceptable risk level? That's what it comes down to. So what level that is depends on your organization and the value of its assets, the size of your budget, and then there's a ton of other factors as well.
Well, and then we talk about risk appetite, right? How much can you take in? Like how much is acceptable risk? And then you look at transference of risk. We're able to accept that risk because we transfer it to an insurance company.
That's it.
Right. And that insurance company covers, a certain part of the liability, because if it happens, then we get an auditor come in, a check that comes in, and then we get going and we're back up and going.
That's the thought process. You're skipping ahead, my man.
I am, but
All right. Let's do this because I want to come back to that, and it's all intertwined, so I hate interrupting you like that. But let's jump into these, the risk terminology. Is that fair?
Sure.
And let's get there. Couple quick ones. Guys, you have to know your terminology for the CISSP exam. It's sometimes it's painful for us to run through all this terminology as well, but trust me, the repetition is going to help you come exam time. So we're going to define stuff in rapid fire. A lot of it's going to be review, but trust me, it's going to help. Brandon, let's rock and roll.
So we want to first go with asset. Got it here. Asset is anything that within the environment that should be protected.
Yep. So this could be a business process or task, computer file, network service, system resource, program, process, product. Anything else? Building.
Well, building, people.
People are assets. Yeah, you got to protect them.
You got to protect them, right? And I know they don't mention it on the book, but yeah, as we've talked about before, people are, your primary level of protection and risk, right? When you look into business, right? Especially, I'll keep relating back to COVID. Companies looked at first of their people first. How do we protect them first?
Right. Now, this one is interesting. So asset valuation is the dollar value assigned to the asset based on actual cost and non-monetary expenses. It says discussed more later, so I think we're going to touch on that again. How do you can't assign a dollar value to people, or do you? I mean, they have salaries.
I'm sure there's an estimated value, right? Right. And you look at potentially even the cost related to the actual employee for what their salary is, their benefits, and kind of that. And
or you can impact to the organization, maybe.
Could be. And you could probably calculate all that together to evaluate that one person's value to the company.
I'm going to have to circle back on that after hours, if that's fair.
I'm sure an insurance company has those numbers. If you're in this position, you're potentially worth between, and they'll probably have a budgetary range between this and this.
Well, they do it for life insurance, right? So if you're a company provided life insurance, they'll do what? 2 times your salary? So I guess there's a number there. Yeah, you're right. Great point. Next one is threats. So this is any potential occurrence that may cause an undesirable or unwanted outcome for the organization or for a specific asset. That's a threat.
Right. And the threats are any action or inaction that can cause damage, destruction, alteration, loss, or disclosure of assets, or that could be blocked access to or prevent maintenance of assets.
Yeah.
That's a mouthful.
So guys, did you guys see the article I posted on LinkedIn today? Just curious. I posted an article on LinkedIn that was the NSA's guide to keeping China out of your network.
Okay.
And it had a list of threats, right? Ranging from vulnerabilities to systems that may or may not be hardened. And they put the recommendation in there, right? So they put the recommendation on how to then harden in order those systems and those services to reduce your risk. Good example. If you haven't checked it out, grab that, get that to your threat intel or your internal IT team. It was a fantastic article released by the NSA. They just dropped it today.
Nice.
Yeah. Cool.
So let's go with vulnerability.
And that's what I was just talking about, right? The vulnerabilities were listed in there, whether it's a CVE, it's a weakness, right? It's the absence of a security control or safeguard. That's a vulnerability.
So in other words, a vulnerability is a flaw, loophole, oversight, error, limitation, fragility, and in the IT infrastructure or any other aspect of the organization, which is again susceptible to a vulnerability.
An employee. It was interesting. On our ISAC call today, they said they were reading through a report for like a Outlook exchange that was compromised, and they said the vulnerability was the human, right?
Okay.
Because they're making him do the push button stuff for his VPN and like multi-factor authentication so much that somebody else requested multi-factor and he just hit accept and boom, gave him access. Right? That's push button. You don't have to enter a code. You just have to say, yep. And like me for permissions setting up today, right? I updated my computer. I'm accepting every single permission it's prompting me for.
So now the question is, and this is just a side note, has anyone been hearing a lot of news about the Macs now being more malware going out to Macs? So talking about risk and exposure, I'm seeing a lot more media around that now. Like before, Macs were supposed to be, they really don't get a lot of malware. They do, but now the media is starting to increase that. But now you look at exposure. You kind of look at people are now at home. People now are kind of all around. So that goes into our next topic, right?
Yeah, exposure. Right.
Exposure is being susceptible to an asset loss because of a threat that is the possibility that a vulnerability can or will exploit by threat agent or event.
Boom. And that's where we get back to that question that I started with earlier at the beginning. What is the worst that could happen? Mm-hmm. Right? So when you're thinking about your exposure, that has to be the question you ask. What is the worst what is the worst that can happen? You're not stating that harm has occurred or that it will occur, only that there's a potential for harm and that you need to understand how extensive or serious that harm could be. So when we're talking about exposure, that needs to be the question that you think of. Now, when you're doing the quantitative risk analysis, the value you're looking for is the exposure factor, and it's derived from this concept.
right? And then risk is the possibility of or likelihood
Repetition for you guys. So next is safeguards. Safeguards is a security control, countermeasure, anything that removes risk or the risk of a vulnerability, right? So it protects you against those threats. That's a safeguard.
Right. And then a safeguard can be installing a software patch, making a configuration change, hiring security guards, altering the infrastructure, modifying processes, improving the security policies, training personnel more effectively, electrifying a perimeter fence, installing lights, and so on. I mean, you got CCTV cameras, you got everything.
Yeah.
I mean, all that to increase your posture.
Yeah. And that's increasing your posture. So when an attack happens, now an attack is the exploitation of a vulnerability, that you can be more prepared. And even if you don't stop it, you can detect it.
Right. And then next is a breach. A breach is the occurrence of a security mechanism being bypassed or thwart by a threat agent. When a breach is combined with an attack, a penetration or intrusion can result.
Yeah, so here is the elements of risk, and I wanted to share this with you guys because I really like this graphic that they had in the CIS. That was really cool the way you did that. I liked that, how you had the half, because it kind of made sense. You kind of split it up and it was like, okay, threats, the exploit, the vulnerabilities, which result in the exposure, right? And that's kind of really your red team side, is they can show you what your exposure is. And then you take that risk, you implement the safeguards for your assets. Well done, Brandon. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm learning.
You're killing it, man. I don't know what you're talking about. Did you guys like that graphic? I thought it made sense, right? It really walks you through that. And I'd never seen that one before, on so how it is kind of circle of life. Before
we move on, does anyone have any questions? Again, we're covering a lot of information pretty quickly. All right. Post any questions you have. And, where do you see yourself working right now? That'd be another question I have for people is, in this area of security, when you're looking at all this, you're looking at safeguards and assets and vulnerabilities. What are you most interested in? Like, are you interested in the safeguards? Are you interested in more the pen testing? It's good to know when you're looking at the CISSP and how your methodology and your thought process is.
Yeah, and I think it's cool because we really do, right, have a mix of people on these every single time, right? Jack was really focused on the offensive.
Right.
I want to say Sean is very much focused on the defensive, right, as an ISSO. So it's really cool, but we'd love to hear from you guys, right? And even when I'm talking to new people into cyber, I say, pick offensive or defensive first. That's your first path in the road you have to decide upon. So we'd love to hear it. What's kind of roadmap? Hopefully it's defensive, right, if we're studying for CISSP, but could go either way. Well,
it could be offensive in the sense of they're looking at the policies and procedures and governance and how it works within the organization so they can speak to them, right, and articulate the requirements and the needs.
Yeah, and there you go. So Salome said she's interested in pen testing. And Salome, I'm going to say, like, I still do pen testing, right? The CISSP is going to be valuable for you. It is a long road for pen testing, right? There's so much to learn. It's not just go out and get your OSCP and you check the box and you're a master pen tester, right? Then you have wireless, you have web apps, you have, it goes on. Brandon, it goes on.
I know. Really?
I'm telling you.
I just can't get one certification, then I'm a pen tester?
And you're a master?
Master pen tester.
Oh.
Yeah, don't go to Black Hat. You get pwned.
Oh, it's good times though, Salome. It's a worthy journey to have, and you're going to have a blast doing it. So please keep it up. I'd love to talk more with you on that.
For Simone, one question. What area of pen testing do you want to specialize in?
That is
Wi-Fi, application, right? Network.
Web app.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mobile app. I did mobile app pen testing for a while. That was
IoT.
There's not a lot of documentation out there for it. Yeah. Hardware, right? So IoT.
Yeah.
IoT is the easiest kind of pen testing, man. The security controls are abysmal on those.
But again, it's good to kind of get focused and get a baseline for start and then work your way up, right?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I was helping mentor a guy, and he wanted to do automotive, and he got the job. He got it. I was so proud of him, man. I think he's working over at GM now, but he's on their security team. So, all right, everybody's doing self-driving cars, and here's the crazy part. Like, if you go on YouTube right now and talk about hacking cars, if you could hack a car remotely, imagine being able to disable the brakes and turn off your headlights to a guy going on a windy road.
Yep.
You think the police are going to be able to reverse engineer that and see that there was intercepted communications? No. They're going to think
turn off the power steering.
Right. They're going to think the guy just drove off the road. So it's really interesting to see the effects it's going to have because, yeah, we'll see. Yeah. So Salome said network. So she's going to start on the network. Salome, that's a great place to start. I'm excited for your journey. And Bert, thanks for jumping in, buddy. It's good to see you. How are you? All right. Awesome. Let's jump in. We got a lot to hit still. Identifying threats and vulnerabilities. And this kind of jumps right into what Salome was talking about. Identifying these. Pen testers is an essential part of risk management, right? Identifying and examining these threats and taking the output from your red team. This is going to create an exhaustive list. You have to be able to bring in multiple sources of input for this so you can have all the lists of threats identified.
Right. And this list should include threat agents as well as threat events. It's important to keep in mind that threats can come from anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about a threat, right? You got COVID, so you got a virus.
Right.
That's a physical virus, or you have computer virus. What are some others, guys? What are some threats? You got intentional attacks. You got company reorgs, right? So layoffs,
right.
Disgruntled employees, user errors, insider threat. We talked about that, or somebody mentioned that earlier. Then you have the black hat or the malicious hacker.
Right.
Disgruntled employees is going to fall in there. What else? Processing errors.
Criminals.
Espionage. Yep.
Espionage.
So, hacktivism. Right, depending on the type of company you're in. And then you have your natural disasters, of course, lightning, tornado, hurricane, fires. Good, my Lord. Is anybody on the West Coast right now? I've got family in Colorado, and it's so sad to see. They just look up at the mountains, and it's just
all smoke.
1,600 homes potentially might burn down. It's nuts.
It's crazy.
But you got to know your risks. You got to know what could potentially affect you. What is the worst that could happen?
Right. And then have a plan, which a lot of this is planning, right? That's what we're talking about.
No, can you make the plan by yourself?
It's good to have a team.
Got to have a team, right? And you shouldn't even make this list by yourself. You should have a team performing that risk assessment and analysis.
Right.
That's it. And then it takes us to mitigation. So you got your list of vulnerabilities. reducing the risk or risk mitigation is the implementation of safeguards and countermeasures to eliminate those or block the threats.
Right. And in fact, countermeasure selection is a post-risk assessment or post-risk analysis activity.
Right. So Salome, I'm glad to hear Bert, by the way. He says he's good, man. So glad to hear Bert. We should catch up here soon. But you're right. So you said the countermeasure selection is a post-risk assessment. So Salome brings me her pen test report or security assessment report, right? Her SAR. And we go ahead and take that and we map out those risks. We do a risk assessment on them. Then you have your post-risk analysis of, you basically map out priority, and then you can also say, okay, these are easily remedied. Let's go ahead and remedy those now, right? During, or sometimes you can do it even during a pen test. They'll present you with this and say, hey, this is critical. You need to fix it now. You would then fix that. But things that may take more development time, you would then map those out based on risk and select a countermeasure accordingly.
Well, yeah, and also incorporate change management process, outages, things like that, depending on the level of change, right?
Yeah. And so you're right. So once you assign that risk, right, are you going to transfer the risk? How are you going to do it? Are you going to outsource that? What if it's a huge dev effort of the way you authenticate your application? Is that something you can handle internally, or is it something you need to outsource to another organization to migrate your authentication mechanisms?
Right.
Interesting decisions, and it's based on assigning risk.
Right. And that's a good question. Like when you guys look at risk yourselves and you guys are maybe doing it on your company, have you gone through meetings where you know who's responsible for those risks, even tabletop exercises? I'd love to hear what you guys go through. Now, Joe, for yourself, when you go through those exercises, do companies clearly identify who's responsible, who's the agent responsible for that risk?
No.
Which department, which division, what title?
A lot of times what we're seeing is, we're working with their security team, their IT security team, right? For the most part. Even their IT security team sometimes is even responsible for monitoring their physical cameras, right? If they have a SOC, right? But a lot of the time it just falls on the IT security team when we're running the tabletop exercises. And we've got a couple coming up. So keep in touch with that. We'll see if that has changed, but it's not like, oh, this policy is ineffective. Like it falls on IT to then figure out what the right policy is, and then they pass it to gRPC, et cetera. So I don't know. Are you seeing something different?
Well, something that, overall, when I worked for the government, the risk assessment and assignment was important because there actually was departments and people in their titles in those departments that were responsible for this. Right. So for the network, for email, for whatever, there was actually divisions and individual titles that were responsible for that. Now people change and move and all that, but that title was responsible for it. So if it was the email administrator, they would be responsible for that risk at that point if the email went down, to do any troubleshooting, mitigation, and reporting after, and then debriefing.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. So, okay, sorry, I digress. I was slacking, Bert. He said, just accept it. I said, what? Whatever the risk, just accept it, Bert? What are they teaching you over there? Good stuff, Bert. No, but so you once you have risk assignment, then you have your risk acceptance, right?
Right. And that's accepting the risk and risk tolerance. Accepting of risk is the result after a cost or benefit analysis shows countermeasures costs would outweigh the possible costs or of loss due to the risk. It also means that management has agreed to accept the consequences and the loss if the risk is realized. Now, I want to point out something here. Key point here. Management has agreed. Right. So you have to get top down approval for this. Don't say, okay, yeah, it's acceptable risk. Don't worry about it, especially at the lower levels or IT. It has to get management approval. The business has to approve that.
Well, and that's the thing. So Bert said residual risk, right? And he's skipping ahead a little bit, but he's kind of spot on. Like once you accept it and you pick your countermeasure, sometimes that countermeasure may not solve the entire amount of risk. Right. So you'll have that second portion of risk that's residual risk that then management is required to accept. So hold on. Let me throw some claps his way real quick. There you go. Those are for you, Bert. And then you have risk deterrence, right? It's the process of eliminating deterrence to would-be violators of security and policy, right? So examples of this: implementing auditing, security cameras, security guards, signage, warning banners, motion detectors, strong authentication, right? This is risk deterrence. Multi-factor authentication, please. Can we just enable it for everybody now? And right, but maybe not the push button. Maybe you require code.
So now, you know what's kind of funny when I worked physical security? The do not enter. The do not enter signs. They're always kind of funny to me because they're deterrent, right? They're telling you not to enter. But if the person wanted to get in, really was kind of go, they're just going to open the fence. They're going to jump over it, whatever that may be, right?
Yeah, but then you've done your due diligence, right?
For sure. How many
times have you heard they're like, well, I didn't see a sign.
Right.
Like it's
a pit bull, a Rottweiler, there's a deterrent, right?
That's right. Well,
there's
levels
that
to
hungry
this
dog,
right? There's levels.
That hungry dog on the other side of the fence. That's a deterrent, right? That's a sign that says do not enter. But enter at your own risk. Then have a Rottweiler on the other side. Now that's a deterrent.
That's true. It's true. So you got your deterrence.
Yeah. So then we got risk avoidance.
Yep.
Right. So risk avoidance is the process of selecting alternative options or activities that have less associated risk than the default common expended or cheap option.
Now is it still safer to fly with COVID than to drive? Have we calculated that risk yet?
Has anyone? I'm sure if you talk to the airline, they would tell you that.
Well, all right, let's ask everybody here. Have any of you guys flown during COVID or in the last 3 months? I heard they were sanitizing everything. And so I'm going to the gym and nobody's at the gym, right? So the gym is actually safer now. They give everybody a spray bottle, so we're cleaning our own stuff before and after. So I'd be curious because the example they had in the book is for example, choosing to fly to a destination instead of driving is its own form of risk avoidance. Another example is to locate a business in Arizona instead of Florida to avoid hurricanes, right? So I think a lot more people are driving places than actually flying because obviously these airlines are hurting, or at least that's what I keep hearing.
Well, same here. And I know for us, you used examples of gyms. We're in a 28-day lockdown again.
What?
Right in Toronto, Ontario. Yeah, we're locked down again.
Seriously? Did
you
guys have a big outbreak?
Yeah, so our numbers have been increasing. So they locked us down for 28 days. And it's a modified lockdown where restaurants, gyms, some gathering events, whatever that may be. I know we have fines now. There's a whole bunch of things that are going on for us. But yeah, we're locked. And I hate to say this, but I think we're heading towards another even more severe lockdown as cold and flu season comes, because we're coming we're fall and then winter, right? As it gets colder here,
that's true. People
start getting the sniffles and all that. So it's going to increase here.
Well, and then Bert says use the mask to mitigate risk, right? So yeah, right. There is now. I won't go too deep, but I did hear that someplace the improper wearing of a mask actually increases your risk, right? So if you're wearing it over your nose, if you're touching it with your hands, all kinds, right? So you're right. Use the mask to mitigate risk. All right. Risk rejection. This one you don't hear about often, but when we go and do audits, that's not true. Let me circle back around after I read this definition real quick. But risk rejection is a final but unacceptable unacceptable possible response to a risk. You can't ignore risk, right? Denying that a risk exists and hoping that it will never be realized are not valid or prudent due care responses. Now, in a previous episode, didn't somebody talk about somebody saying they didn't even want the security assessment done, so they didn't even have to know the risk existed? Was that in our show?
Yes. So now let's talk quickly about that. So companies, what happens is, from what I'm hearing, right, and not naming any names or any companies, they actually, you know who it was? It was Gorev.
It was Gorev.
It was Gorev, our cybersecurity
lawyer
expert that came on. Yeah, the lawyer.
Yeah.
And he was talking about, because what happens is once they do the actual assessment, now they're liable to do the remediation because they know of the risk. So they'd rather not do the assessment and ignore the risk.
Now, speaking of guest appearances, guys, our next domain is domain 2, and we want to bring on a guest. It's asset and data security. So we would love if you guys know somebody who is just a specialist on data security, whether in applications or in an organization, please let us know either in the chat or offline. We'd love to hear who you guys think we should bring on. And Jack also mentioned he was flying back in March and April, and they were spraying everything down, cutting any snacks, pillows, blankets, no frills and whistles. They were just flying point A to point B. So glad you're safe, Jack. Looks like you took a calculated risk, and it paid off.
Nice.
There it is. Well, cool. I know we got a little more. We got about 4 minutes left, guys, so we're going to try to rip through it. Let me throw back up our risk equations real fast, and let's talk about the total risk. So, guys, if you guys didn't take a screenshot of that, hold on, let me throw it back up. Maybe print it out on a sticky. Can you do that?
Sticky? I
Cool.
don't know. That'd be really
printer.
small.
Yeah. Okay.
That'd be really small.
Maybe on a regular printer.
A little sticky, no?
All right. Let's hit countermeasure selection and implementation in 3 minutes. Think we could do it?
Okay. I think we can do it.
All right. Selecting a countermeasure or control within the realm of risk management relies heavily on cost-benefit analysis.
Right. However, you should consider several other factors when assessing the value or pertinence of the security control. One is the cost of countermeasures should be less than the value of the asset.
Right. If it's more, don't do it, right? Because then you'll have to accept that risk. The cost of the countermeasure should be less than the benefit of the countermeasure.
Right. And the countermeasure should provide a solution to a real and identified problem. Don't install countermeasures just because they're available or advised or sound cool.
What? That never happens.
Oh, dude, it happens so much. New innovative AI technologies, next generation, all the sales stuff you heard.
Hey, don't hate on my data science. All right. The benefit of the countermeasure should not be dependent on its secrecy. This means that security through obscurity is not a viable countermeasure. I'll let you take the next one. Yeah, it's not.
Right?
No.
The benefits of the countermeasure should be testable and verifiable.
The countermeasure should provide consistent and uniform protection across all users, systems, protocols, and so on. It's got to be a good solution.
Has to be. And the countermeasure should require minimal human intervention after initial development and configuration.
How many security tools require ongoing tuning? All of them?
Like, there's very rare. And if they sell you that it doesn't.
Who wrote this book?
It does.
The countermeasure should be tamper-proof.
Yeah. We'll talk about that after. The countermeasure should have overrides accessible to privilege and operators only.
The countermeasure should provide fail-safe or fail-secure options. I'm going to say if you have to check all these boxes for every security tool you have, we'd be struggling a little bit.
Yeah, there's not that one size fits all turnkey solution like that does everything.
Yeah. Now, real quick, you have your security controls, you have your countermeasures, you have your safeguards, and they can be implemented administratively, logically or technically, or physically. And I have this one last graphic for you guys. Let me throw it up for you. Here we What do we got? Oh, the worst thing to do is ignore risk. You're right, Bert. It will come back and bite you. Can we do a couple more examples of administrative controls? I didn't do it due diligence.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go through it. Well, we got a couple minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, 2 minutes.
Let's do it.
Cool. Administrative controls. You want to take the second 5? I'll take the first real quick. So I talked policy, procedures, hiring practices, right, guys? We hit on that last time. Hiring practices is huge. Then doing background checks, data classification. Man, we spent almost a whole episode, or we will here in the near future on that. Security awareness and training efforts as well. Those are huge. Those are administrative controls you have to implement.
Right. Then you got vacation history, reporting reviews, work supervision, personal controls, and testing.
You don't think about work supervision, right? Especially with COVID.
No. You know, how are you supposed to supervise someone now?
Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. But yeah, guys, so that's it. That was most of domain 1.9. We'll have a little of domain 1.9 and then it's domain 110, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much once again for interacting, for being here. You guys absolutely rock. Literally every Tuesday at 7, if you guys are here with us, we're all going to pass the CISSP together. We got this.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is great. Do you guys have any questions before we jump off, right? Let us know, comment. So no, Joel, since we've done 10 episodes, we're on our 10 episode anniversary.
Okay.
Happy anniversary. Any motivational CISSP thoughts at what we've gone through so far?
Yeah. I mean, guys, this domain is the biggest one in the entire book. I mean, talk about being extremely text heavy. Guys, you've made it through a significant chunk of this book. And if you're just jumping in, it's not too late because all you have to do is review the first section, right? So moving forward now, setting this, write down your goal. I will achieve the CISSP. Hop into the book. If you don't have it, we have all of the resources for you. We can get them to you. Reach out to us. We can download you we can get you the digital copies. And then also there's a CISSP app on your phone with questions on it. So throughout the week, you can take your test questions and really get it ingrained in you. That's my weekly motivation. What do you got for us, Brandon? Practice.
Implement. Speed of implementation. So what you guys learn from us on Monday, right, or on Tuesday at these sessions, start talking about it at work the next day. Start kind of implementing, start practicing, start to do that. The more you implement this in your day-to-day, now it becomes something you just do each and every day. And then when you write the exam, now you have something that's relatable. Oh, remember that time I went to a meeting? We talked about that. Remember I talked to this person, I did that. Now it becomes versus later on, in December, you go write the exam, go, remember that thing, ATO? Yeah. No, I don't remember.
Well, and guys, Brandon's my accountability buddy. He makes me be here every Tuesday. Get an accountability buddy. Guys, find somebody to do this with. It's going to make your job easier. They'll keep you accountable. You guys can come join us here on Tuesday nights. You guys have that calendar invite. Send it to somebody. Bring a friend with you on this journey, guys. That's all we got for this week in Cutting into Cybersecurity. Guys, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Have a great rest of your week.